All right.
All right. I believe we are the only two left, and Sharik is going to do his thing. So, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Peace be upon you. My name is Osman Ijaz, and I am part of the steering committee here at the Minaret Foundation. Our focus here is to lift American Muslim voices for sustainable change through multi faith and civic engagement. Joining us today, we have Akilah Bacy, who is running for House 138 in the western part of Houston, or Northwest, right? Or is it West or Northwest?
Northwest West.
Yeah, okay. As part of our candidate Q&A series where we interview candidates running for office and learn more about their stance on issues concerning not just the Muslim community, but the multi-faith community as well. Thank you for joining us, Akilah. How are you doing today?
My pleasure. I'm so glad to be here. Doing great.
Cool. Well, let's jump right in. Can you give us, a few broad strokes of your platform?
Certainly. Well, I'll tell you, I guess my platform is birthed from what actually got me into this race. And what that got me into this race was the idea of a commitment to social justice. A lot of that began working in my community as a volunteer teacher, doing pro bono work, and even in my professional career. But when we look at social justice, it's not just one issue. It's not monolithic, which I think a lot of us think of within our court system, but it includes justice within our school systems, our educational systems, within our employment system, within our healthcare systems, and also our court systems as well. And so when looking at that, some of my broad strokes are making sure that we have equitable funding for education. I say equitable very particularly and not equal because everyone doesn't need the same amount. There are some students that have been just historically disenfranchised that need more of that upliftment to make sure that we're all graduating and teaching students and getting them to that same level. We talk about healthcare. We see the crisis that we're in with COVID-19. And Texas is still has one of the highest uninsured rates, and so we need to make sure that we are using the funding, being very responsible with the funding that we receive already from the government to take care of our Texas residents as well. And then also we do need just a huge reform within our court systems as well, so that everyone who walks in there feels like they can get justice, and that the price of their check or where they come from in the community is not determinative of that.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for giving us your platform. You mentioned healthcare, education, and court change. So let's start with healthcare real quick. For decades, healthcare costs in the U.S. have risen faster than the rate of inflation. Amidst the increase, 30% of healthcare spending is estimated to be unnecessary. What policy solutions do you support to address the rising costs of healthcare?
Well, the first thing that we need to do to make sure is that we need to cut back on the ability to a rising prescription drug cost. One thing that we've done in America, which we don't see a lot of times in other countries, is that we have had people so dependent on medicine as opposed to preventative health care or better lifestyles, that we now have people addicted to medicines or needing medicine, and then we increase that cost of medicine. So what we need to make sure that we're doing is now decreasing that cost and not having such an outlandish profit for medical companies at the expense of people who they have now made dependent upon this care. And then going forward, we also need to make sure that we're expanding Medicaid. Currently, we give away billions of dollars back to the government that Texans have already paid for in healthcare spending. But because of political grandstanding, we no longer are able to use it. And so we need to turn around and take that Medicaid expansion to a vote to the people, so they can determine whether or not they want to just give their money away to California and Alabama, or do they want their funding that they've already paid back in Texas to help insure Texans with that Medicaid expansion? And also, that's really important because what we understand is that when people get sick who don't have health insurance, what do? They wait until it's so bad that they have to go to the emergency room. What does that do? That turns around and it goes, and people who have insurance, those premiums go up. And that increases the cost of health care for other Texans. And so that's how we make sure that if we're expanding Medicaid, then we're decreasing that emergency room dependency for those who are uninsured, which then lowers our premiums across the state for those people who are fortunate enough to have health insurance.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I vaguely recall reading something recently where we are leaving something like $5.4 billion on the table by not expanding Medicaid in Texas. So that's it's good to hear that you are interested in at least looking for solutions to that and providing better healthcare for Texans. Speaking of providing better healthcare for Texans, where do you stand on defending protections for people with pre-existing conditions?
We have to do so. When we look at what they consider to be pre-existing conditions, they're going to affect about two-thirds of Americans as it stands. Things as simple as asthma are considered pre-existing conditions. We're looking at COVID-19. If you've now received COVID-19 and things of what happens from there, it can be a pre-existing condition. It's so subjective and arbitrary as to what can be considered a pre-existing condition that we have to forego that and make sure that people are getting treatment. And not only that, the people who are looking to qualify for treatment and for preventative care or more preventative care are people who might have already had ailments. And so, we're doing that. Also, it's almost like you're saying, we will help you, but only if you don't need the help. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I get that. I've had some personal issues with that, so you may see me like make expressions just because like I'm thinking back to what I'm personally going through or what I personally went through.
Right.
For the record, the Mineral Foundation is not like taking a policy stand right now.
Okay.
Right, it's just like if you see any expressions on me, it's not something to do with the organization. These are just my personal expressions. Just had to clear that up because I know somebody might get upset by this. All right, moving along.
I didn't upset anyone. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just what it is. It's nonprofit versus political. There's a very fine line. You got to make sure we don't cross it. With regards to education, it is 50% more likely that a student arrested in high school will drop out before graduation. Many high school students are arrested due to misconduct. These arrests are often referred to as a school-to-prison pipeline. What is one concrete step and/or policy you would take to combat the school-to-prison pipeline?
One thing I think we need to make sure that we're doing is we're taking officers out of our schools and we're putting counselors back in. And I say that from a very personal standpoint. I have a nephew who, and he told me that he wanted to go visit a counselor, or I told him he should go visit a counselor, and he said, "Well, why? I don't need a schedule change. I don't need this." And I said, "That's not what counselors do. Counselors talk to you about your issues." And he said, "No, they don't. They do administrative work." And I said, "You don't have a counselor that you can go to as a student that will help you with issues at home or, self-confidence or things of that sort, just personal issues that our students go through." And he said, "No, they don't do that anymore." I said, "Wow, well, that's something that we have to change, that we have to make sure that we are providing that mental health support for our students in school where they spend 8 hours a day, where the majority of their social lives are wrapped in. They don't have that mental health ability or support system here." And so what I think is really important is that we need to make sure that we are putting those counselors back in to help with those misconduct, those issues that we see, at a higher rate in which we put officers in. And while I do think that officers have a place in our society, what officers do is that their job is to arrest those people who break crime or who commit crimes. So when they're looking at an issue, that's typically the mindset in which they're heading for. Is this something we arrest for or not? Their job is not to be mental health experts, to do things of that sort, to provide mental health support. And so, I think that we need to make sure that we are putting in place people whose job is to provide that support, and allow officers to do their job as well.
Oh, yeah, these are some of the issues that are important to me because I have seen firsthand some of my friends who did end up in jail in high school because of something that, in the grand scheme of things didn't really matter. A friend of mine played a prank in the school and he let out a couple of pigs in the hallways and he lived in 1, 2, and 4. And staff spent hours looking for 3, but there were only 3. I mean, yeah, it's in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter.
Yeah, well, those are senior pranks, right? Those are not things that we look at as someone needing to be arrested for.
Right, and so that's something that did personally affect a friend of mine. So thank you for your position on that. With regards, we're talking about police. Let's continue with this police reform. Chief Acevedo and other police chiefs have gone on record to say they believe if an officer is fired from one precinct, they should not be allowed to be rehired. In Texas, if a police officer has to be fired in Texas, a police officer has to be fired twice before they're unable to be rehired. Would you agree with Chief Acevedo and other police chiefs that officers should not be allowed to be hired once they've been fired?
Absolutely. And I say that not to be callous or to disregard the work of law enforcement in our community. But when we think about when someone is fired from a position, there's typically warnings, there's typically retraining that occurs, there's typically redirection that occurs, putting someone in a different a department that occurs. All of these things are put into place to reform whatever malfeasance or bad behavior or unacceptable behavior occurred before that final decision to fire someone. And then also, not only that, but we have to look at the job of our police officers. Their job is extremely important to our community. And in that, it has extreme consequences if that job is not done correctly. And so we can't afford to say that you're not, you're not equipped to be in this agency, but you can be equipped to come and serve this community here. There has to be a lot of accountability what we have for officers because what they do is so important to our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for a fact here where I live in Fort Bend. I don't actually live anywhere near district. I'm in the southwest part of Houston, and I've seen this issue personally with a handful of our elected officials. So it's very important personally to me that we talk about that. Climate change. Recently, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern stated by 2030 New Zealand would be carbon neutral. You seem to be somewhat passionate about climate change. And, I do vaguely recall at some point you may have mentioned evidence-based climate change reforms. What is one step that you can do or you can take at the state level to make this a reality?
Well, one thing that we do at the state level is we incentivize, we regulate, and you put in punitive measures, right? Very, very simplistically put, that's what you do. And so, what we need to make sure that we're doing, one, is that we are regulating our current factories. We are the energy capital, one of the energy capitals of the United States, if not the world, right? Here in Texas. And so, we can still be that leader by showing how it is that we can produce clean energy, showing the new innovations that we have to protect our climate while not foregoing our economic stability and our economic dependency. And so, what that would mean are certain things, very particularly for House District 138, is going to be regulating those factories that we see. When I talk about social justice, that includes climate justice, and we think about things like factories that are around homes, and typically factories are built in lower income communities, which then cause more health issues and whatnot. And then, particularly in House District 138, we had a factory that recently exploded in January, and what that made me think about was also that we are prone to flooding with like Hurricane Harvey or being flooded if we did not flood, being flooded. And so when you have a factory that's not adhering to regulations and not being held to those standards with either with punitive measures if they don't meet those regulations, then when we flood, those chemicals then flow into our streets, they flow into our homes. And they flow into our water systems where we live, and they cause a whole new set of issues for our community that could have been prevented but for regulations that we're actually following. And that's one of the very bare bones places of climate change that I think that we can put towards actionable steps in this next legislative session.
You may have noticed me grin earlier. It's because we had two other questions regarding climate change, but you just answered both of them in your response to one question. So I guess I just have to move on. Yeah, that's great. I just have to move on to the next section. Talk about Islamophobia. We are the Minaret Foundation. Our focus is on Muslim American interests. So it's very important that I ask these questions. Yeah. In recent history, there are certain state legislators and even Congress people who have shared some worrisome posts regarding Muslim Americans. Recently, self-proclaimed Islamophobe Laura Loomer won the GOP nomination in Florida, and her hateful rhetoric surrounding Muslims is terrifying for all. But nonetheless, she's won. What would you do, or what would be your first step to combat Islamophobic and other hateful rhetoric, whether in legislation or just in public or just in your office? I mean, what would you want to do?
Well, one thing that I am very particular about doing, and it's a minor thing for me to do, but is one bringing the voice of the Muslim community into my campaign. Uh, when I went to go visit a mosque recently on Friday, they told me, "Oh, you don't have to wrap your hair." I said, "Well, that is the custom that women wrap their hair, correct?" They said, "Yes." So I said, I was very particular to do that. Not only do that, but to take photos in that and to place on my page, to show that we can we can respect and understand and appreciate other cultures without it being a threat to our own, and allow that to be as encompassing as we do so many other faiths and religion and classifications within our community as well. And I think that step comes from having leaders who are the opposite of those who spit that fear mongering and that terrible rhetoric, but that really show the beauty of the Muslim faith and the community, and what it is that they truly represent among the families of faith.
Yeah. Thank you. Hate crimes against against us Muslims have risen to historic highs in the past 4 years. These crimes have devastated families and communities. How would you use your position to ensure that justice is served and that no other family or community would have to go through violence?
Okay, well, that's another question, right? And I think that's a really important question, because what we have to look at is that another thing is okay, says he says, I can't stop my brother from hating me, but I can stop him from killing me, and that's equally as important, right? And so what we need to make sure they're doing is, when there are hate crimes that are committed, that we're not treating them as a simple crime, but we are putting in enhancing mechanisms that show that if somebody is committing a hate crime, that this upgrades the level of which this case typically would be. For instance, and I'll just speak, if we're having let's say we have what's considered a simple assault. If somebody decides to physically attack someone because of their faith, because they are Muslim, that is typically, or just in general, someone decides to attack someone, it's typically a misdemeanor. If we add in there that this was done because of their faith or because they are Muslim, then we need to increase the level of punishment to make that a felony. But not only make it a felony because we already have that enhancement mechanism, but what is the level of punishment? What is that punishment range in which you are looking at? Is this something that we consider to be mandatory sentencing, jail time, things of that sort? I'm not really big on mandatory sentencing. A mandatory jail time, but you need to look at those issues. It's something that's going to take more than what we can dissect here, but we have to make sure that we are showing within our laws the importance of keeping our community members safe, and the importance of denouncing hate crimes and crimes that are committed specifically because of who someone is. And so we have to do a better job of that, and it needs to be something that is mandatory within our system and not discretionary.
So, in your intro, you did mention reforming the courts or some type of court reform. I want to flow into that because you just talked about mandatory sentencing. Can you give me more about what you would want to see in, say, court reform?
So mandatory sentencing is something that I am not a really huge fan on, but I think of issues of hate, of violence, of hate crimes, that's a different issue than where we see a lot of times we see mandatory sentencing on with things like drug addictions or things of that sort. That I am absolutely against. I think that our system should be more for rehabilitation. And I think the only time that we should look at mandatory sentencing is when someone is being a danger to our community. If someone is so violent and hateful and vengeful as to attack someone simply because of who they are, that is not something that we need to take lightly. That is not something that we need to risk the safety of our community to reform. However, if we have someone who is who's lost their way, someone who might be troubled, someone who might be suffering with addiction, someone who might be what we see a lot of times is a victim of trafficking of some sort, those people do not deserve mandatory sentences. Those people, we need rehabilitation. We need a court system that's working towards mental health. We need a court system that's working towards making sure that there is job and economic development to help people get back on their feet, to get out of that position in which they found themselves, that placed them in that situation to begin our court system, our criminal justice system in the first place. And I say that because we hear this word rhetoric now around human trafficking. I've done a lot of work with human trafficking, but oh, we need to have mandatory sentences for human traffickers. Well, what you don't understand is a lot of times those who are convicted or charged with human traffickers are not are victims themselves. They're the same women who were trafficked and then were had a gun put to their head and said that you must, go and tell them to come with us, or get this, tell them, convince them. Then they're charged with human trafficking. This is a victim we're re-victimizing again, and that's something that we have got to stop doing with our criminal justice system.
Well, speaking of criminal justice, one issue that we are particularly focusing on are the children in cages at the border. In light of General Jeff Sessions' comments regarding separating children, we as people of faith find it morally wrong, which is why we're concerned about the current state of family separation in Texas. Our great state of Texas hosts ICE facilities that have contributed to family separation. At least 2,600 immigrant children were separated from their parents or caregivers, and they are being held in for-profit detention centers. How do you plan to keep families together, and what steps would you take to ensure that no one is making money off these children's trauma?
Well, that's the first thing. That's when you said, how do you plan to stop to make sure people aren't making money? Is that we have got to stop making our government, I hate to say this word, encampments, prisons, for profit. No one needs to profit off of someone else's misfortune within our government system in general, but especially not within our government system. If the government feels that there is a necessary reason to detain people for whatever reason, then they need to foot that bill. That is not something that we need to send out. And also, we know when we look at for-profit institutions within our government, we know one thing, that those regulations are reduced significantly, accountability is reduced significantly, and people may not necessarily, and the transparency is also reduced significantly. And so, first, I will say this: I do not agree with the children who are placed in camps. I do not agree, so much so that I actually do pro bono asylum work for children seeking asylum here. And that began as not someone who does pro bono, does immigration work, but because I just saw just the depravity in this system that separates families who are coming here simply for a better life, in which America totes across the world to be able to give people. And so I think that we need to change that, and we need to give people a pathway to citizenship. People oftentimes are not coming here for one reason, but a lot of times they're coming here for um, because of the I guess the terror, uh, the discrimination, the lack of safety in their home countries. So much so that they're willing to risk a dangerous trek to get here for the just the chance to give their child what so many people in this country try to give their children, just a chance to do it. And so I think that that's extremely important, that we create a pathway of citizenship there, that we remove the profit systems of our government encampments, whether it be prisons or detainment centers as well, and that we release those families, keep families together, and you can give them their court dates, which is a lot of times we have to use the cite and release. And if they're brought back into our system, then you can take action from there. But including that, I think that that needs to be on ICE. What we see a lot of times we talk about ICE is that our jails are used as immigration holding centers, which is not fiscally responsible for taxpayers. That is a federal expense that the state has tacked on as a burden that we take on, because ICE asks for you to hold someone in custody until they can come to them, which can be months, which you're paying for. My thing is this: if ICE wants to have someone in custody, then they need to foot that bill. That does not need to come out of our state budget.
So you did mention asylum seekers, and we also have interest with not interest, but like we also care about some of the refugees that are coming. I don't know if refugees is the right word, asylum seekers, or if they're synonyms here, but these are two important groups that we do work with. Recently, President Trump has once again lowered the refugee cap to an all-time low, and Governor Greg Abbott this year sought to refuse refugees altogether in Texas. How will you continue to meet the needs of these existing groups?
You know, what we have to do is do what we're doing now, and that is, and I understand that you are nonpartisan here, but we have to fight to flip the Texas House to a majority that understands the importance. And as people of faith, one thing that I think we all, that a lot of our faiths share is the idea of welcoming the immigrant, helping those in need, and bringing forth, using what we can in service of others. And so what we need to make sure we're having a majority in our capital that wants to see people have that true opportunity. And that begins with flipping the state house now, flipping the Senate and the governorship in 2022, so that we can have a state capital or state government that is truly working for the people and all Texas residents and those looking to come in here to provide that sanctuary and that opportunity.
Well, as you said, working for the people and all the people, we are one of the most diverse cities in the country, if not the most diverse city in the entire country. But ultimately remains a talking point unless we see it reflected in our relationship with government. What would you do to ensure diversity in all aspects of your office?
Well, one thing that I think you can look at is how someone has conducted, for me, someone who's not been in office yet, but how have I conducted my campaign? I have not gotten on anything and made in a position on any minority group in which I am not a part of without speaking to members of that minority group. And I also have looked to make sure that I have been open to all members of the community, whether or not you've made a donation to my campaign, whether or not you agree with me on what I say, but to listen to those voices. That's something that I've done within my campaign, while I've had liaisons from every community to talk to me and say, explain these issues to me. And then I also keep that open line of communication to say, I might not always get it right. There might be some things on here that I might not have gotten right. And guess what? Later on after this, you can call me and say, Akilah, you said this, but I do want to chat with you about this, right? Can you explain to you why I don't agree with this? And then we can talk. And you know what? Maybe I'll come to a different resolution. Maybe we might not. But one thing is, everyone will leave feeling heard and listened to, and would have worked through and dissected that issue together. That's something that I also do within my personal life before I even started running for office. If you look at all the things that I've done, I've worked with human trafficking victims. I've been a Sunday school teacher. I've worked teaching asylum. I've taught ESL. These are all things, if you look at them individually, you're like, there's really no continuity to them. But what it is I've seen a community that needed help, a community that I might not have belonged to. And I used whatever influence or power or privilege I had to serve that community.
Well, we are almost to the end of our session today. There are a couple more questions I need to ask you. So, let's kind of get through these. What is one thing you value about your opponent? And I know it's always a weird question, but, let's actually, I trust. Yeah, go ahead and answer it however you want.
Well, one thing that I will say that I value about my opponent is that, to be very truthful, and very candid, is that the way that she has begun to run this campaign has made me stronger and more resolute to fight for the vulnerable, the disenfranchised, and those who people try to vilify and force our community to turn away from.
I do recall you mentioned that earlier that we are people of faith. How does your faith or spirituality or worldview drive your decision-making process?
Well, it's a part of who I am, and what that my faith has led me to do is be a fighter for social justice, to be a fighter for all. One of the major commandment in my faith is to love one another. Full stop. There is no buts. There is no ifs, ands, ors. It is love one another. And that has been my driving force from the very beginning, is how do I show love, concern, and care to someone else, to another, to my neighbor. And, when we say love, that's not an affinity feeling, that's an action feeling. What can I do in service of my neighbor? What can I do to include my neighbor? What can I do to uplift my neighbor? That's what love is. Love is action. And that's how my faith drives my position and my platform going forward.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Akilah. I mean, I know we're in early voting. I know you're going to head out to the polls real soon. So we really appreciate you being generous right now. Uh, for everyone who's still watching, or still watching, everyone who is watching, today we were joined by Akilah Bacy, who is running for House District 138. My name is Usman Ijaz, and I'm part of the steering committee of the Minaret Foundation, where our focus is to lift American Muslim voices for sustainable change through multi-faith and civic engagement. Akilah, are there any last words you would like to say?
Well, no, just get out, please vote. Vote all the way down the ballot. My name is Akilah Bacy, and I'm running for Texas House District 138. And I'm running to represent all of us. I'm running to listen to all of us. Too long, our seats have been held by only those who listen to those in power, or those who can do something for them. But our public service need to be in place to serve our community. So I ask for your vote, Akilah Bacy, for Texas House District 138.
Yeah, and that is on the northwest side of Houston, right?
That's it.
Cool. Thank you so much, Akilah. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck in your campaign. We will be here next week or in a couple of days with our next candidate. Please tune in to the Minaret Foundation's Facebook page, YouTube page, and all the other platforms we're streaming on. And we hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon now. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, God bless. Bye-bye.